Och där har vi.
Good morning, good afternoon to those online. Welcome to this session here in Stockholm on resilient prosperity for small island developing states. My name is Sarah Nodolist. I'm the program manager of the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership at the World Bank, and I'm going to be your moderator today. This is a pivotal moment for this meeting. Last year, the SIDS leaders and partners endorsed the Antigua-Barbuda Agenda for SIDS. This is a 10-year framework that puts water security and SDG 6 at the heart of resilient prosperity. The framework is a call to move from commitments to scaled implementation. Across SIDS, fresh water is scarce and stressed. Climate change is making things worse. Longer droughts, more intense storms, saltwater intrusion, and coastal aquifer degradation. Service gaps and safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene remain large, and in some places are growing. Service gaps and safe drinking water. The last international conference on SIDS responded with a clear directive: accelerate SDG 6 in islands, expand access, improve water quality monitoring, and cut pollution. Well, building systems can withstand shocks. What does this mean in practice? First, integrated water resource management that protects watersheds and coastal aquifers, manages demand, and increases storage. Second, solutions that fit island realities. Diversifying sources, water reuse, decentralized systems, and relentless efficiency. Third, embracing nature-based approaches such as mangroves, wetlands, ridge-to-reef restoration. These approaches are important to safeguard supplies, buffer disasters, and create livelihoods. Concessional and innovative financing is important, particularly that matches SIDS vulnerabilities in small scales. This means climate-resilient debt clauses, catastrophe bonds, contingent lines, and country-led platforms that crowd in private capital for resilient wash and water systems. Data and capacity are equally essential. Stronger hydromet, water information systems, better water quality surveillance, and effective early warning to manage compounding risks. Finally, this is also about partnerships. It requires UN agencies, multilateral development banks, the private sector, civil society, and most importantly, governments to align finance, policy, and technology. Over the next 90 minutes, we're focused on three questions. The first, how can SIDS and islands rapidly expand climate-resilient wash while managing demands and protecting aquifers? And what does this mean particularly for SIDS vulnerabilities? Second, which approaches on policies, institutions, and projects are most viable and affordable in different island contexts? Finally, what concrete financing and partnership models can unlock scale this decade? By the end of this session, our objective is to identify a concise set of actionable priorities, policy measures, financing solutions, and project pathways. The challenges are high and the needs are immediate. So this is an opportunity, and the opportunity for impact is within reach. So this session is going to be organized in three sections. The first part will have 4 presentations from colleagues at the World Bank looking at water security challenges and solutions in islands in the Pacific, in Africa, the Caribbean, and in the Philippines. During the second part, we'll hear from experts in a discussion looking at water security challenges in terms of nutrition and human development, policies, sanitation, pollution, and economy nexus, as well as financing and SIDS. Following the panel, we'll have a Q&A session where you'll be invited to ask questions to our panelists. We'll be taking questions online as well as in the room. So we're looking forward to your active engagement in the session. And now we're going to start with our presentations. So let me introduce our first speaker, who is Chris Severin. Chris is a senior water specialist at the World Bank and will address some of the water security challenges facing the Pacific, as well as some of the recent survey work he's done in Fiji and Papua New Guinea. Chris, over to you.
You can see me. I cannot see anything, but I can see you. That's good enough, I guess. Is it?
Just a moment, Chris. Let us get your presentation up.
Okay, I'll sit very quietly here.
Okay, your presentation is now up.
Okay, great. I can't see anything, so I'm totally working blind here, but that's okay. If you can see the presentation, that's good. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. I feel an urge to just bring what is water insecurity, because to me it's a very abstract measure. But I live in Port Moresby, and I'm there working for and with the bank and all the different stakeholders in the country, trying to see if we can further water water stability and access to water and sanitation in general. So when I walk around there in the street, watch out on the street. I mean, I see scared faces. I see crying children, right? I see eyes saying, "How do I cope with this?" And these are some of the things that, to me, is the base of what water insecurity means for local people. Of course, there are many different iterations of this, but that's what I see in the country I'm in. So let me go through this. As we see here, there are many different ways that water insecurity uh, can manifest itself. It could be something that we can measure in the household income, society, health, education, and so forth, as we see here. And then the causes of insecurity it's multifold, of course. There are some things that are related to infrastructure or lack of infrastructure. It could also be the state of the infrastructure. It could be reliability of the services, and how is the setup, the governance structure around this. There are many different ways. What we are trying to do today, I will try to walk you through a survey that we've done out in Fiji and in Papua New Guinea. Can we go to the next slide, please? Fantastic. So what we've seen here is that normally when you do a survey on insecurity, it often is about access to the service itself. So how much water is there? Is there enough for my children? Is there enough for the household and so forth? And it's based on some very easy measurable indicators. Whereas here, what we're trying to do here is also get some of these other flavors of what do you feel when you don't have access to water? How does that impact your daily life? How does that impact your mood and so forth? And that, of course, gives us a whole new set of data that we can combine with the more traditional, as I said before, where we talk about how much water is there available for you a day, how much does it cost, and so forth, and then also get the mental state and how that impacts your life. So that's what we've been trying to do here. It's a survey that's been doing 7,000 surveys. It's a phone interview, so every month we've been going out for 12 months. Continues, luckily, so we will have an even richer data set over sometime next year. It's not available online yet, but I'll try to share it the best I can today. Next slide, please. So let me just run over here. So in Papua New Guinea, there's a lot of people that do not have access to drinking water, clean drinking water. Same goes for sanitation. So here, the WHO and GMP survey say there's around, we just heard the news numbers today, 25% have access to drinking water. And that, of course, is far from where we should be. Often they have disruptions, especially in the urban areas. The rural areas are not really connected. When disruptions happen, they last for a while before they're reconnected. And this is both a matter of the capacity of the system, as well as it could be breakdowns in the system. Next slide, please. So what is this water insecurity? What does it come to at the end here? So you see here, those who experience a disruption are more than 56 times more likely to experience any form of water insecurity. That's pretty remarkable. Luckily, it's not everybody having these disruptions, but it's enough that it's a big portion of the population. We're looking at roughly 20% that feel that they're secure. So that means 80% are not secure, and that, of course, is a big issue for a country and for how the household stability is. So what does it do? It impacts. So this is both a matter of feeling shame, you're worried, you're angry. and you don't know where you put that anchor because there might not be a system for these kind of complaints. As it says, for disrupted, the 85% of people they feel that have to change their plans. They have to change their coping strategy. So it means that a lot of people in PNG in Papua New Guinea are very good at coping with this stress. And even though it's stress for them and it adds a lot of stress to the day-to-day life, they actually have good coping strategies. Next slide, please. So let me jump to Fiji. Fiji has a better, I mean, it's a more advanced system. There are many more people. Most people have piped water. However, most of the piped water there have E. coli contamination. So it's not perfect either. But we do have here, we see that more people in Fiji are, the moment they experience disruptions, they are not so good at finding other coping strategies. Probably as when compared to Papua New Guinea, where a lot of people still rely on more informal sources. They're better at getting water from a river, or they will go to a neighbor and get water there or whatever. I mean, they have better coping strategies. Whereas if it happens in Fiji, people feel really frustrated, and that, of course, impacts the day-to-day life in Fiji as well. It's not to the same degree as we see in PNG, but still, it is problematic. Get to the next set of slides, please. So here we also see the disruptions. They have impacts on increased water insecurity. In this case, it's less than what we saw in PNG, but still it's 35 times as high as if you don't have water insecurity. We need to go to the next slide. I have 2 more slides, so I need to run through them within my 8 minutes. Please, there we go. So what do we see here? What is also the most frequent and widespread disruption? So urban areas where you have piped water, is when it breaks, it has a tremendous impact. You are further away from your maybe more traditional sources of water, and that of course makes urban population very vulnerable when you see these disruptions. That's a situation that's mirrored also in the case of Fiji. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, these are 2 very different countries. One has nearly 100% coverage of water infrastructure on drinking water. That's the case of Fiji, whereas in PNG, maybe 25%. So they're not directly comparable, but they'll give you a snapshot of what's happening in they represent different parts of the Pacific. Disruptions are really important because when there's a disruption, it continues and it actually increases for the families that experience it. It's really hard to get out of this vicious cycle, if you will. As I said before, PNG, they're easier access to different sources of water, whereas in Fiji, where most water is piped already, you're more stuck and you feel more desperate. You might have better options for buying water, but anyway, it is a massive issue for both economies. So this, of course, it's a very fast 8 minutes to run through this. It's a very deep data set. It still gives you a little bit of a flavor of what's happening. We're very happy we have the data set. We hope we can share it with you next year as well, and give you an even more depth to a paper, because it's not enough for 8 minutes to talk about this fantastic data set. But I'm very happy that you allowed me to speak today. I hope there will be time for questions, and I want to leave you just with letting you know that when working in these Pacific Islands, we are working in a situation where there's a lot of desperation. We see a lot of these sad crying faces I talked to before when I started. But at the same time, there are opportunities. We get water out in a place like Yalibu or in Biala, where we have it in PNG. All of a sudden, you see these girls gathering around a water source that's safe, that's protected, that gives them clean water. And it's all happy smiles. And that's what makes me go to work every day. If I can get to that for a few more communities, it makes the day for not only me, but for many countries in the Pacific. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for sharing those research and reflections on how water insecurity affects at the individual level. Very interesting. We're now going to turn it over to my colleague Victor Vasquez, who's a senior water specialist. He's going to discuss some of the water security challenges facing Comoros and the Zanzibar Islands. Thank you, Victor. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So, yes, I'm going to present a snapshot on the situation in 2 islands in Africa. I'm presenting on behalf of my 2 colleagues who are the project managers for these interventions, James Origa in the case of Zanzibar and Leonida Sara in the case of Comoros. It's a quick snapshot on the situation in the islands and the interventions we do align with the topic of the session. So in general, for the 2 islands, these are very small islands, and Zanzibar part of Tanzania, as you know, where water resources are quite fragile. They are very heavily dependent on rainfall and seasonality, which is becoming less predictable. And they have a high reliance on groundwater, both of them. And groundwater is a vulnerable resource for 2 reasons. One is overexploited, and there's saline intrusion all over the place, and also because of the poor sanitation and the pollution. So both factors contribute to really weaken the resource. I didn't mention also the excess of water in the times of cyclones, which are very frequent in the area as well. So when there's flooding, I think the poor sanitation situation worsens, and the spread of vector diseases is more common. These are both heavily density populated islands, and in both cases, probably more in Zanzibar, tourism is a big sector of the economy. I think Comoros is a more incipient sector. I think the government really wants to develop it. It's more like alternative tourism now, but they want to really increase it. But in both cases, the situation of water resources, the vulnerability and fragility of the water resources is really a factor, a constraining factor to develop the sector. There are limited public budgets on water and sanitation, so it's not really a top prioritized sector, and the capacity institutionally is low, from the engineering capacity to review designs and develop interventions. So our projects, we have interventions and projects in the 2 islands. They go from interventions at the infrastructure level to really increase the efficiency of the water supply, and really focus on analytical studies to really understand better the vulnerabilities of the system from both the supply side and also the infrastructure side on the drainage, considering also options for diversifying the water resources, from improving the recharge of groundwater, but also solutions on the rural areas like rainwater harvesting, or really even desalination options when it's viable. And then there's a lot of focus also on digitalization, GIS mapping, remote sensing, etc. And last, I think on the way forward, I think we were trying to move away from successful pilots and then really scale up solutions at the programmatic level, like really building capacity of the governments through new programs that really focus on climate resilience, on governance reforms to really strengthen the sector, the capacities in both situations, and really diversify also the financing options, really going away for just public budgets. Even if the sector is more prioritized, I think we need to really start attracting the private sector and looking for innovative finance solutions, including carbon finance or climate finance solutions. So this is in a snapshot the situation in these islands on behalf of my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for presenting some of those priorities and how the World Bank is addressing some of the diversity of challenges and vulnerabilities being faced by small islands. Our next speaker is Midori Makino. She's a lead water supply and sanitation specialist, and she's going to talk to us today about some of the challenges and opportunities of addressing water security in the Caribbean. Midori, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. So let's shift gears to the Caribbean. Water is one of the key drivers for the socioeconomic development of the small island developing states in the Caribbean region. Water is an essential resource for the key aspects of life. Maybe you could go to the next slide and we can list those items. Yes. So those are health and sanitation, agriculture and food security, economy and livelihoods, environmental sustainability, social equity, and gender equality. Water is also critical for the tourism industry in the Caribbean, which is a major source of revenue for many of the island countries. It also contributes significantly to the GDP and 33% of all jobs. More than 58% of the exports are water related. And these include agriculture, fisheries, agri-processing products, and irrigation-dependent produce. Okay, we could go to the next. Thank you. This slide shows that Latin America and the Caribbean region in general has relatively abundant water, but in the sub-region of the Caribbean, the water resources are unequally distributed across the countries. And in some areas, there's a large availability of water, but this is masking the situation in other areas that are experiencing severe water stress. Barbados, for example, has the lowest renewable freshwater resources per capita, and it has declined from 342 cubic meter per person in 1961 down to 285 cubic meter per person in 2020. And this is continuing to decline. This level is, it's quite low, and it's actually worse than what people don't know about is that this level is lower than the average for Middle East and North Africa region. So that is, which is already known as water scarce. So it's, Barbados is really suffering from this issue. We could go to the next slide. The graph here to the left shows that many of the Caribbean countries, starting with Barbados, are both highly water stressed, and that means that the large percentage of the renewable water resources are being withdrawn. And at the same time, it has absolute scarcity level of the renewable water resource per person. And those are, those you see at the far left, upper left side, those are the countries that are facing the biggest stress and scarcity. The Caribbean countries are also extremely vulnerable to climate change and natural disasters, such as hurricanes, which can wipe out a significant portion of the GDP. Increasing temperatures are also causing rising sea levels and also accelerating the evaporation rates, and which greater water stress from water loss from rivers, aquifers, and lakes, reservoirs. The graph to the right here shows the changes in precipitation rate over time in the Caribbean, and you can see it's going down over time. And it's it's likely to go down. Okay, we could go to the next slide, please. So what I have just explained and talked about is quite concerning already, but this situation is made even worse by the weak water utilities in the region and also their inefficient services. Non-revenue water figures are generally high. And for Jamaica, the water losses are alarmingly high, with nationwide NRW non-revenue water average of over 75%. And many of the utilities in the region can't even recover their O&M costs, operations and maintenance costs, through the tariff revenues. While water and sanitation coverage levels are quite high in the Caribbean, and that's about 91% for water access and 96% for improved sanitation, wastewater treatment is very low, and it's actually only 6% of, only 6% of the wastewater in the Caribbean is treated. This lack of wastewater treatment really increases the pollution and the risk of spreading waterborne diseases, contaminating drinking water sources, and also damages the ecosystems and aquatic biodiversity, which are very important for these islands. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so challenges of the Caribbean's water sector include governance framework, which means that they might have a water policy, but they may not be implemented properly, or they're not formally endorsed and approved. Accountability and institutional framework are often weak or not transparent. Capacity of the human resources is also low in both quantity and quality. And that's primarily from the migration of skilled workers. The geographical conditions are also such that it's difficult to access the dispersed and small islands in the region. But, we have had good relations with the government. We have been working and through policy dialogue and done a lot of studies. And we have identified some untapped opportunities, some potentials for the future. So I would like to list those. First, there are good examples of non-water reduction programs that have been implemented. And these have been done through the performance-based contracting. So these could be scaled up. So one example here that we list is Bahamas has had good experience in such NRW PVC contract. So that could be replicated in other parts of the region. Another potential could be the adoption of the low-cost sewage and fecal sludge management through decentralized treatment and other means. In countries with water scarcity, treated wastewater could be reused as well. We could try that for agriculture or aquifer recharge, and this would conserve the fresh water. Since the sector challenges are so huge and it's very hard for the public sector to do this alone, it would be beneficial to also increase the private sector participation, for example, in the form of use of innovation, technology, and also energy efficiency in wastewater systems, for example. Finally, the region could explore wholesale approaches to technical assistance, capacity building, and maybe even like procurement, bulk procurement, other means. Okay, so we could go to the next slide, please. Yes. So the World Bank, in partnership with the government and the governments in the region, and also with the other development partners, we have developed a proposed regional program on the Caribbean water security and sector efficiency. The vision of this program is to secure water for the Caribbean sustainable development in a changing climate by improving efficiency, sustainability, and governance in the water sector. It consists of 5 pillars, which are pooling of specialized, the first one is pooling of specialized expertise through technical assistance. Pillar 2 is improving efficiency of the water services. Pillar 3, expanding wastewater and sanitation services. Pillar 4, augmenting utility systems, resources, and capacities. And Pillar 5, building foundations for long-term water security. So in the final slide, and the next one, please, the World Bank, would like to invite the partners interested in the same agenda and join forces with us. We are just initiating this preparation of the program, and the timeline for implementation will be between 2026 and 2030. And opportunities for co-financing would be both at the country-specific level and at the aggregate regional level. So please, if you're interested in joining this program that we're going to be supporting for the Caribbean region, please reach out to any of us here at the World Bank for more information, and we'll be connecting you to relevant teams that are leading this effort. So I would like to end this my presentation here, and thank you very much for listening, and I will hand this back to you, Sarah, to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Midori, for very nicely highlighting some of the water challenges as well as climate challenges, but also providing some opportunities and highlighting areas where we could work together to address some of those challenges. We're now going to complete our tour around the globe and go out to the Philippines. Lala Fabella, a senior water supply and sanitation specialist, is going to talk about 2 island tourist destinations in the Philippines, which are facing water supply, sanitation, and pollution challenges.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to Philippines. Let me give you a background of where we are. We are right there, where we have the Ring of Fire, and we are also in the typhoon belt in the world. We are a group of 7,100 islands in the Philippines. Although there are 3 major islands, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, there are a lot of small islands across the Philippines. So you can see everyone is surrounded by water, and you can just imagine the number of coastal communities all over the Philippines relying on agriculture and suffering from the vulnerability from climate risks. We have a population of 110 million, poverty rate of about 22%. But most of our population is living in the urban areas. And right now, there is an increase also in coastal urbanization as we explore tourism in the islands. And I will show you an example, actually, in a little while. But well, right now, today, there's no government work and classes are suspended because typhoons have been coming in and out. And I think the record so far is that 3 consecutive typhoons coming in and really no work and no classes. So this is the kind of situation we have in the Philippines. And definitely we experience this a lot. We experience more frequent flooding. We experience droughts and disasters. And all of these have a major impact on the water security in the whole country, but most especially in the islands, because they are the most vulnerable in terms of climate risks. And because of these constant battering of the country, water and sanitation services are also falling behind. You might have heard of Metro Manila. I don't know if you've been to Metro Manila, but if you know Metro Manila, you would think, if Metro Manila is the Philippines, then water supply and sanitation is not so bad, no? But only 15 million people are actually in Metro Manila. And the wider part of the population is outside, suffering from this kinds of situation where water is coming through vehicles and not through pipes. And even if there's water, the quality is not that good. So you would see in islands where you might have the nice resorts, a nice view and all that, but you turn on the water and water is a bit salty. So that is a common situation in the tourist islands in the country. We are currently working on a project for 3 islands in the Philippines. One is Bohol. Bohol is a very beautiful UNESCO island. It's really lovely. I don't know if you've heard of the Chocolate Hills. I'm so proud of the Chocolate Hills in the Philippines. Please check that out. But then 1 million tourists are coming every year in this island. And a lot of it is also rural. The Bohol is a largely rural agricultural population. And so what Midori, Victor, and Chris have mentioned on water scarcity and water insecurity is straining the infrastructure in this island. I'm showing you the example of Siargao. Siargao is very famous for international surfing. It's a very poor area. They have 500,000 of tourists coming in every year. And again, the strain in the infrastructure, both for the residents as well as the tourists. And there's also agriculture in these areas. So that constant battle of water sources is happening in these islands. And in Bohol and Siargao, these are islands which were almost wiped out in the typhoon in December of 2022. So we were able to go there in March 2022. The World Bank team was there, and we found Siargao to be practically wiped out. All the coconut trees almost were down or split in half, and the houses are gone. No? So these are the islands that are very vulnerable to disasters. And finally, we have an island down in Mindanao, which is called Jolo. It's in the province of Sulu. And this one is it's a very interesting island because it suffered from fragility, conflict, and violence for more than 20 years. It's now just becoming peaceful. And one of the ways for peace building is water security. You agree? All right. So we're looking at tourism, we're looking at peace, and using water as a tool to try to address these major challenges. All right, the project is called Accelerated Water and Sanitation in blah, blah, blah. But essentially, the objective is to increase access to safely manage water. Water that's not good quality, available anytime. And in the approach here, we're combining investments as well as huge capacity building. As Victor mentioned, the capacities in these islands are not the best. No? And also the capacities for resources are also not there. Now, the investments we're looking at when you go to these islands are what do we have now here? And how can we make them more efficient? So that is the first order of the day, to make use in the most efficient way whatever resources are currently present. Because these islands are also suffering from, and you will hear from later on from the Siargao mayor, that there is really not a lot, because water just really flows out into the ocean in these islands. No? And we want to create economies of scale by not just looking at bits and pieces, but trying to put it together as a holistic approach for the island. So in these islands, we're going to do master planning, looking at all the water resources, energy master plan, and trying to look at the totality of the water security issues. And we're implementing the whole value chain, from water resource to water treatment, distribution, as well as sanitation and wastewater management. It's never been done in the Philippines. A project like this is usually typically just bits and pieces, right? You've heard of projects where you just work on certain areas, but here we're trying to do the whole value chain, essentially because sanitation, and Martin will talk about that later, is equally important as water supply in these areas because it will affect the coastal community, coastal marine environment, which is actually the source of their livelihood. No, not just for tourism, but also for fisheries. And so this is hopefully something that we'll be able to push through soon because these islands are beautiful. These are shots during the mission. So these are not shots from the internet. But you see, I love going to these missions, but seriously, these are really very beautiful natural islands. Unfortunately, we have to keep on working on the water security side. So the next part, I wanted to give you an idea of how is it from the perspective of a mayor from one of these islands in Siargao. All right, so we want to hear from Mayor Coro, and if we can play the video now. Thank you.
Mayor Alfredo M. Coro II, Municipal Mayor of the Municipality of Del Carmen, Siargao Islands in the Philippines. Siargao is a teardrop island located in the northeast part of Mindanao. There's around 200,000 people here, and currently we're the #1 island in Southeast Asia. Prior to that, we were the #1 island in the world according to Condé Nast. If we go back 15 years ago, we were also facing a different kind of challenge. I started my term in government around 2010. I was faced with different issues, including poverty, wherein a lot of our fisher folks were tempted, and some actually did, sold organs just to make a living. Some kids were eating off sand just to feel full. So that was the story we had, and we had to figure out how to make sure that they never would have to experience that kind of poverty again. As an island ecosystem, of course, you have very, very limited land that can hold water. That's the very, very first problem that we have. Given our projected growth rate of around 2.5 million visitors a year, from the current 500,000, this would mean more amenities, more restaurants, more hotels that would potentially require the need of a lot of water, potable water. Would also mean that we have to balance it with our existing other industries like farming, fishing, that would also need the same amount of water that can be utilized for their industry. And trying to get all of these things together, I think we might have an issue, meaning if we need good water, we might need also good power. We might also need good waste management practices, better behaviors in terms of how businesses are being done. So all of these things have to come into play. But in a fragile ecosystem like Siargao, which is a protected landscapes and seascapes, there's a lot of consideration that has to be done, and we cannot do things as is. We have to be creative in ensuring that the fragile ecosystems will always be protected despite the needed development to make sure that the people continue to live harmoniously with nature. Because we don't want to go back to the poverty we experienced, and we also don't want to underutilize the opportunities that we have right now. So trying to balance all of these things within the limitations of what we have in terms of water resources is something that we hope to address very soon with available technologies that are already in the market that can be supported by other utilities that would be required to produce the type of potable water systems that we would need. So with the right behavioral changes that are driven by the science, by the policies, and by the tech, we might be able to address the issues that we hope to not happen, and ensuring there's equity in access to water, access to food, and access to all the other utilities that every other resident of Siargao and all those who are coming here will be able to enjoy. There should be a balance of the needs. There's no one higher than the other. And in understanding that balance, you now look into the data, you look into the tech, you look into the processes, all of these things co-created with everyone, you'll come up with a solution. There's no one solution that will fit a singular island because we have different cultures, we have different behaviors. But in the end, we always look into equity. We always adhere to respect the science and the experts and balance it with our local culture. I think that's the key why we were able to support behavioral change towards positive engagement for nature, because we listened and co-created the policies with the local people, with the different sectors of the government, including those that would want to help. We have to keep in mind those who have least. For those who have more, there's a lot of options. You can just move to another town, move to another country when issues happen. But for those who have none, there's no plan B, plan C, plan whatever. There's just what they have.
Thank you, Lala. Thank you for bringing us the remarks from the mayor and for highlighting some of the challenges the Philippines is facing and some of our approaches to addressing those. I'd like to thank all four of our presenters. I think they've done a great job of highlighting the diversity of challenges that small islands are facing. We've been across the globe from different regions, but I guess the commonality is the smallness of these countries, the diversity of challenges, the climate vulnerabilities. We also heard about what these water security challenges, how they impact the lives of individuals. So So we want to turn now to look at the opportunities. Our panelists, our presenters also highlighted some of the opportunities for addressing these. We think there's a great opportunity to learn across small island developing countries from each other and to build capacity together. So I would now like to invite our 4 panelists to the floor. We have Sarah Young, who's professor of anthropology and co-director for the Center for Water Research at Northwestern University. Martin Gambrill, who's a consultant and visiting professor at the Universities of Newcastle and Leeds. Bapon, yes. Fakhruddin, he's the water sector lead for the Green Climate Fund. And online, we have Francesco Sandico, who's professor of the International Environmental Law and member of the Executive Board of the International Water Resources Association. Thank you and welcome. So I'm going to start off with Sarah. Sarah, I believe you worked on the tool that was used in Papua New Guinea.
Guilty.
So based on some of the research that you've been doing and the reflections on the human development aspects, could you share highlights of your research and how they could be helpful in implementing water solutions and addressing challenges in small islands?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And I just wanted to congratulate the panelists for really bringing a world tour of small island states and the opportunities and obstacles to water and sanitation security. So I have been working on the water and security experiences scales for the last 10 years. And you could say, who wants another water indicator? We have enough. And to that I would say these WISE scales were created sort of like necessity is the mother of invention. And while I'm doing ethnography and learning what people are struggling with water, there's this picture that I have in this folder here of a woman who is very pregnant, going to fetch water. There's a big sim tank behind her, and Lake Victoria is kind of right there. So there's physical water, there's the infrastructure, there's improved infrastructure water, but her mother-in-law was not letting her use that water. So she went into early labor with great harm to her child and herself, which tells us that what really matters is not so much the availability or the infrastructure, but how water is showing up in people's lives. And while my ethnography is great, no one wants to read a whole bunch of pages. We want numbers to make decisions with. And so that is what caused us to create the Water and Security Experiences Scales, which have now been used in more than 80 countries. And it's a delight that the World Bank has used it in Karnataka in a before and after evaluation, that it's being used in these high-frequency data collections on a monthly basis in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and a number of other places. So you asked how this information could be useful, because we're not just here to write papers that 12 people read, but really to have information that's impactful. And what we've seen is that there are kind of 4 ways that experiential data can be helpful. And the first is that it highlights needs. So what we're seeing is sort of the assumption is that the rural areas are the problems, and urban people are okay. But what we see is while there's infrastructure someplace or not other places, just because there's infrastructure, there's not water security. So this can help identify need. It's also a little bit more broad than a drinking water indicator, because we're talking about behaviors that relate to hygiene, to consumption, and then the psycho-emotional component. So we can see need. We can also use this to hold people accountable. So I can't tell you how many government people say, water, I'm here for water, this is my #1 policy. And I say, okay, that's great, and we're really looking forward to remeasuring water insecurity after you've been in power for a year or 2. So we can see the differences. We're so glad you're committed to water. Let's, show us the money. The third is that we can use these data for advocacy. So while these sort of numbers don't really resonate, like parts per million of colony-forming units of E. coli, parts per million of salt, don't really resonate, policymakers and other advocates understand the importance of not having their constituents angry, or people understand about going to sleep thirsty. Those are more intuitive indicators, and I'm looking at some folks from Walgett, Australia, who can speak to that, so for the advocacy. And then finally, we can use this to understand impact. This is a room full of economists. You know more about return on investment than I do, but what we can do is we can say, with every dollar invested, water insecurity has gone down by X amount. I'll leave you with the fact that while we all care about water, the other thing that these experiential measures can do is they're a bridge to other sectors. So I don't have to work, hopefully, too hard to convince you that how water shows up in people's lives matter. But we have data that links water insecurity experiences to health, like HIV viral load. We can link it to depression, maternal depression. We can link it to school education, school attendance. We can link it to all these things. So this is like a bridging thing that brings water to other sectors. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So one of the, another important part of the WASH agenda is the sanitation agenda, and it's important that we don't forget about sanitation and the impacts it has, particularly on the marine environment. So Martin, I know you've done some thinking on this, so could you tell us a little bit about your experience and maybe some solutions that you may have for small island states when it comes to sanitation?
Sure, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the presentations which set the scene so fantastically as well, and to your intervention, Sarah, as well. The problem with sanitation is all around the world, whether in small islands or elsewhere, is it lags behind water supply, and it's often not even mentioned. It was in the presentations today, but there's a willingness to pay for water much more than there is a willingness to even acknowledge sanitation and its impact on health, on environments, and on the economy. So what we've seen, and Midori made reference to this as well, that in many islands in the Caribbean, for example, there is less than 10% coverage with sewers. So that means people have some alternative form of sanitation, and it's often unregulated, informal, and does not protect either public health or the environment. And so we need to understand that, and the World Bank and other leading development agencies initiated the citywide inclusive sanitation approach to embrace all of the different types of service provision, sewers, both conventional and simplified approaches, but also understanding on-site sanitation and the associated septage or fecal sludge management. I was recently in St. Martin in the Caribbean, where less than 10% of households are connected to sewers and to wastewater treatment. Everyone else has on-site systems, and they are often very unregulated, and consequently, the contents are either informally discharged to the environment and thereby make their way to the beaches, or are collected and then can be dumped. And we see this all around the world, and many times in small island states as well. So we need to understand what the sanitation systems are, and we need to be able to map what's happening from those sanitation systems with pathogens, which have an impact on human health, very importantly with nutrients, which have an impact on the marine environment. So we see wastewater pollution affecting coral reefs, affecting seagrasses, and affecting mangroves. And these are the economic basis of the tourism that we've been talking about and hearing about today, and we can't afford to lose them because there are economic implications for the fishers, for the scuba divers, and for the surfers that we heard about from the mayor as well. So mangrove swamps help with sea level rise and help protect islands from storms. They help provide resilience to storm events. However, and I found this out from our marine biologist counterparts that we've been working with, especially Amelia Wenger, who's here at World Water Week this week, that mangroves have deep roots normally. They have deep roots to get to, so they can get to nitrogen and phosphorus. However, if there's wastewater in the estuary where the mangroves are, and we saw many images of that with the mayor's video, then the mangrove roots are shallower because they get the phosphorus and nitrogen from the wastewater. So when a storm comes, they're more vulnerable, and mangroves are a carbon sink. Seagrasses are also, 88% of seagrasses around the world are affected by are polluted by domestic wastewater. And seagrasses absorb carbon 35 times more than rainforests. So there are these links between sanitation and the environment, sanitation and climate, and we really need to be aware of those. There are many examples from around the world of where people are rethinking sanitation so that we stop the pathogens and the nutrients going into the marine environment, which are the calling cards of these beautiful islands. And their tourism will be wrecked if we don't get the sanitation right as well. The more water we take into a community, a household, a town, the more wastewater that's generated. We need to understand it. And this is something that's affecting islands around the world, including here in Sweden, in Gotland, for example, in the Baltic Sea. In what's called the legal Baltic in Sweden, all wastewater treatment plants have tertiary treatment for nutrient removal. Nevertheless, some 30% of nitrogen is in that tertiary treated effluent being discharged into the Baltic. That's with perfectly functioning wastewater treatment plants. What that tells us is we need to understand the constituent parts of wastewater, and we need to make sure we're treating them differently, that we're separating the black water from the grey water and keeping it on the land where the farmers want it, as was referenced by some of the speakers, and out of the seas where it's causing this damage. They're even now investigating here in Sweden, separating urine from black water, because the urine has the phosphorus and the nitrogen in it. That might sound very cutting edge, but it can be done. Container-Based Sanitation Alliance have ways of separating black water from urine as well in lower middle income countries. So we need to rethink our approach. There are many jobs created, my last point, there are many jobs created in the sanitation service chain. They can be direct jobs from service provision, some of the things I've been talking about, indirect jobs from materials and equipment, and induced jobs such as those of tourism. So we need to look at the economic benefits of sanitation and use those from a health, from a dignity, from an environmental perspective and an economic and tourism perspective to make the case to decision makers, such as ministers of finance and ministers of planning and mayors, but in this case we had an enlightened mayor, so that they invest in sanitation and water supply. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Speaking of decision makers, one of the other commonalities across SIDS is gaps in access to finance. So now I want to turn to Bapan, and given some of the constraints of small island states, they often need to look for alternative financing models or alternative financing. So I'd like to hear from you, particularly from your perspective coming from the Green Climate Fund. What might some of those alternative financing approaches be that SIDS could use? Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I think listening to the presentation as well as panel's perspectives, the problem is actually a very systemic problem. And actually there is a quite cascading and compounding linkage here actually. What you're talking about one way is actually a small island, obviously vulnerable, lack of water, availability of water is very less, but at the same time, knowledge is very shallow because and when you're talking about the climate change, understanding what is actually a 40 millimeter precipitation is actually impacting into watershed, who is a farmer is sitting in a small community, is actually very complex to understand unless they do actually those kind of data-driven modeling. And the knowledge is not there. And often actually whatever the small pocket of water source they have, that actually got polluted or unconsciously or consciously because of the poor sanitation systems. So you also lose that kind of momentum. But then the problem is, okay, obviously they need a financing, but then if you talk about, one is actually fundamental financing or baseline generation or baseline activities, and then if we come top of that climate financing, because climate change is also increasing the sea level rise as well as flood, drought, whatever it is. And once it comes to the climate financing angle, as I sit on the climate financing side of it, we need to ensure that actually our finances actually create a climate action. But then when you're talking about the water supply network, or there is a non-revenue water loss is 60%, or there is no basic sanitation system because people need a pit latrine, and which is not a climate change problem. That's like a fundamental requirement for a household. And then where actually they could actually mobilize those basic financing and then, mixing with the climate financing so that actually we can ensure that there is a climate action is there, but at the same time, there's a fundamental finance is actually available within the government or through other bilateral. So there is also this kind of gaps on the coordination mechanism or actually work together in an island perspective, but also on the other side, on the governance side of the government side is maybe more on the absorption capacity, how much actually they could absorb. Because when you're looking at the Green Climate Fund or this kind of vertical scalable financing, we don't actually finance a small scale. Our finance is very large scale financing. And how much actually the government can actually absorb and has that kind of experience on managing such kind of things, or how can actually we work together through those kind of technical expertise, know-how, and as well as mobilize those kind of financing is quite big challenges. If you look at on the war side of it, our pipeline is quite thin. And obviously we are a country-driven organization, so we ask ourselves that why actually when the NDC and NAP is actually talking about the water and sanitation is the biggest challenge, but why they're not actually accessing financing for that kind of things, or why we don't actually receive a good proposal. As I also mentioned about some of the innovative technologies, like there are a lot of technologies that are like how can the carbon sink could be happen, or carbon credit could be done in the sanitation. There are a lot of nice publication, literature, science, research, but how many of research is actually came really into the operational domain? It is questionable, and how much actually translate really to the action is maybe more questionable. But then when you're sitting on the financing side, you're asking actually yourself actually why we are not able to get those kind of proposals so that actually we can really create a bankable. Because in the past, you say, for an example, carbon credit could be done through the sanitation, but we cannot do it because of the scaling. Because we are talking about, we did a piloting on 1,000 household, but now we need 1 million. And I'm sitting here, actually, I can fund for the 1 million of household, but then why not the proposal is there? Is it maybe the country doesn't have a priority, or there is a lacking of knowledge? We don't know. So, and that's the reason I think with the Climate and Sanitation Coalition, we come up with actually a guidelines that how to actually you can access or how to you develop a climate resilience sanitation proposal. Because whenever the request comes, people actually want a pit latrine, but we want to go for a little bit on the pit latrine to a more innovative technologies which could actually create some climate action. And I think we like to request our philanthropy or our advocacy agency as well as academia who are actually in this field, because we are a funder and we are a second order due diligence, so we also don't do anything implementation. But we need actually quite a collaborative partnership as well as our advocacy agency could support to the countries how they could actually understand the problem and how can actually they package those kind of problem into a more bankable proposal that could actually create to unlock a large financing from various vertical climate finance. Those are actually available in the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Bapon. So we've heard from our panelists how water insecurity is impacting and creating challenges for small islands in terms of financing, in terms of human development, in terms of environment, in terms of economic growth, lots of challenges. I want to turn now to Francesco. You convened the first Islands Water Congress about a year ago. I'd be interested to hear from you your thoughts on how the outcomes and themes of the Congress linked to the reflections that you've heard today through our presentations and our panelists. Are there key focus areas that we should be looking at when addressing water security in islands? Did these themes resonate for what you heard from that conference? And is there other things that we may be missing in this discussion? Over to you, Francesco.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Yes, perfect. Okay. So first of all, thanks, huge thanks to the organizers for inviting me. I'm really sorry I cannot be there in person with you. I will touch upon it, but I'd like to start with actually the words of the mayor of Siandao, a very powerful video. He really was emphasizing this balance between development and environment protection within a limited landmass. I think that focus on the limited landmass is something that resonated to me quite a lot. And he, amongst other things, said that that balance can be achieved through technology, behavioral change, but he also referred to policies. And that's where I would bring also the regulation and the law, which obviously I can talk about more. And this is really where the International Water Resources Association comes in. For the last 50 years, it's really been at the heart of the interface between water policy and water science. And as you just mentioned, and I'm delighted to have been part of this, since last year, we have started to doing that also from an islands and water perspective through the Congress series on islands and water. The first one took place in 2024 in September in the Faroe Islands, but it has a very much of a global dimension. I know, for example, that our colleague Christian Severin was almost there but didn't make it. But I really hope that both him and other members of the panel and also members of the audience may join us in the second edition that will take place in 2026. We don't have yet the ink on the signature, but it's almost there, and we will be able to release the host at the World Water Congress, the 19th of Heidelberg in Marrakesh in December. But going more to the common themes and so forth, I think there's an aspect here of islandness. I am not an islander myself, but I have been working a lot with islands, both here in Scotland and elsewhere. And I think when it comes to freshwater management, this islandness can both be very, very strong, but sometimes maybe emphasized too much, especially from a legal perspective. So in a way, whether you're in Zanzibar, whether you are on a small island of Papua New Guinea or Philippines, or even if you're on a small island of Scotland, there are some elements that really bring you together. And partly the Congress and even sessions like this really resonate to that islandness, if you want. On the other hand, many of the comments that even Christian, for example, mentioned of Papua New Guinea or Fiji, would they really be that different in other realities that are not islands? And sometimes I do wonder whether there is an element of islandness that is sometimes emphasized either too much or too little. There's a concept, for example, here in Scotland of island-proofing legislation. And that I know, for example, in Indonesia, there are similar pieces of legislation. In Japan, you have similar pieces of legislation. And that's something maybe to consider at a donor level and so forth. Do we operate in the same way if we are lending money to Granada or to a non-SIDS, etc., etc.? Now, one of the things that I think came out very strongly, and I move now to proper policies and finance, is maybe one thing that has not been mentioned, partly because it's incredibly recent, but it links to this SIDS need to be creative. And this I'm focusing mostly on SIDS rather than on subnational island jurisdictions like Zanzibar or others, or Mayotte, for example. You started the intervention saying that the ABAS, the Antigua Barbuda Action for SIDS, puts water very much at the center. I slightly disagree. I think water is present. Whether it's really at the center, I'm not 100% sure, but it is good that it is there in part of it. One thing when it comes to finance that most small islands, especially from the Pacific, have been looking at it. Finance is a matter of justice. And here, what is interesting is the outcome, very recent, just a month ago, of the highest judicial court of the world, the International Court of Justice, which was asked by the General Assembly, but really through a lot of effort from Pacific SIDS, the key question, what is it that states have to do to protect the climate system? And in a nutshell, because I only have 30 seconds, but in a nutshell, the court said two things. It said, contrary to what a lot of countries say, every single country in different degrees, but every single country has to do their utmost. They have the highest level of due diligence to take climate action. And if they don't do it, there will be legal consequence. And this is where it becomes from abstract and theoretical to practical. Because if after a climate-related disaster, the water infrastructure in a SIDS gets devastated, as happens sometimes in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, it's now also as a matter of justice and international law for the Pacific SIDS to consider, you want to call it finance, call it as you wish, but you can, as a matter of law, say that needs to be repaired. There needs to be restitution of that water-related climate hazard infrastructure. That wasn't there a month ago. Now, it won't happen like that. It may even need further controversy, dispute settlement, and so forth. But I think that's the creativity of SIDS within the context of climate and water landscape that is really fascinating and that we will be discussing also throughout the various Islands and Water Congress series at the International Water Resources Association. So thank you very much for the space, and I'm happy to answer any questions should there be any.
Great. Thank you very much for that intervention. Now we're going to take the opportunity to have some questions and answers from our colleagues in the room, but also those online. So I will suggest we'll take first a couple of questions from the room, and then we will turn online. Do we have a microphone?
Yeah, there's one down there.
While we wait for the microphone to be passed, can I just ask a clarifying question to my colleague here?
Yep.
You're saying you're not getting enough grant applications. That's the bottom line.
We are saying we are not getting a quality
Okay, quality grant
Quality
applications
application.
at scale
at scale.
for carbon reduction wash intervention.
Overall, actually, water and sanitation.
Okay.
Because if you
I
go
hope
very
everyone heard
specific,
that.
it would be very less.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Anton Earl. I'm the Global Coordinator for Water Systems at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. I was really pleased to see the video with the mayor of Del Carmen, partly because Mayor Coro is also on our Global Executive Committee and actually heads up the portfolio for biodiversity, health and water. So it's great. And it strikes me, I mean, ICLEI works with around 2,600 local governments globally. And whenever I speak to any of the mayors or representatives over there from these local governments, you know, they would always say, well, you know, policies are formed at national level and then they're implemented at local level. And when anything goes wrong, when there's a flood, when there's a drought, when there's wildfires, any of these things, we are expected to respond first and foremost at local level. But they really struggle to attract support for this. And it's technical resources, but also financial. I mean, Bapon, you mentioned the funding that is available over there, but most of that, in their experience at any rate, is really allocated at the national level. And I mean, even Mayor Coro, that is on the video there, I remember speaking with him, and you'd say, well, at national government level, the priority might be decided that a road is needed running past our island, when in fact what is really the pressing issue is livelihoods and people having access to food supplies and the tourism industry and taking part in that. How do we ensure that local governments globally can really access some of this finance, and especially in the case of SIDS, where the impacts of a changed climate are felt so viscerally at local level? Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Do we have any other questions in the room? Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is related to tourism and the opportunities that that sector may offer in providing solutions. In many of these islands, you know, tourism is either strong sector or incipient sector, as we've seen. First is affected by the problem because their water supply, sometimes they struggle to really get secure water for the customers. And on sanitation, you know, they still suffer the consequence of especially marine pollution, which have health problems on skin and other issues as well. They have financial muscle. Sometimes, you know, they have a big capacity financially. They pay a lot of taxes. And then there might be a problem on accountability and transparency on how those taxes are used. But then they have a lot of capacity to be part of the solution because of the public health or public nature of the issue, right? You don't fix it only for yourself. If you fix it, it has to be fixed in your environment. So I wonder, you know, if there are experiences or how, you know, that opportunity can be used at scale, especially, I guess, maybe in the smaller islands, but if there are experiences on this. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. I can cover both of these things with two examples. Anthony, you raised a very important point, and that also our actually fundamental motto, that actually how the climate finance actually, the benefit actually goes to the ultimate most vulnerable community, so that the beneficiary should be the community, not the government, not the borrower. So you need to make sure that the accessibility goes to up to the beneficiary or up to the most vulnerable people who's in the community. And one of our actually, if you look at in GCF side, that's we call locally led adaptation. And that's also our KPI that we need to be achieved at in a 3 years period of time. And if I just give an example that how we actually create some of those markets to local municipality to access the financing, the South Africa could be a good example where actually we provided, and you maybe know that this is not common. This is very common that the country actually went for consecutively 3 years, day zero. That means there is no water in the Cape Town. And we mobilized $1.4 billion a water project through the DBSA and as well as South Africa Water Authority. And the finances actually created a highly concessional financing so that the local municipality, they could actually access from the local bank with a very low concession or high concession. And that could actually create a more governance systems as well as water supply and basic infrastructure system. Giving a good example on the tourism, because that's also our question is actually when you can actually create a bankability or a return on investment and using those kind of financing and programming, you actually de-risking the market, why actually our private sector is not actually collaborating with us. A good example we gave in the last June in Nepal, where you can see a $50 million we actually mobilized for the GLOVE project, which is like a glacier flood forecasting as well as flood management. So where tourism authority, they put actually $5 million as a co-financing in our programming because we were able to actually de-risk the market and they could actually mobilize the more than 30 or 35 MSME into the area. And similarly, a hydropower association in Nepal, they also actually put another $5 million because with this lake lowering into the GLOVE, they were able to attract the market to small hydropower company who will be able to invest. So this is how actually we try to create lots of project, how actually a public and private could collaborate together as a co-financer or PPP or in any other instrument that could bring into the market to create some innovative as well as scalable and sustainable financing and sustainable programming for resilience. Thank you.
Great, thanks for those very concrete examples of to respond to the questions. Francesco, did you want to come in? I'm wondering if you may want to address the question, particularly with regard to local versus national level decision making.
Well, again, I don't think this is just a question about kids.
So I'm sorry, we're having a little bit hard time hearing you. Can we adjust the sound, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's better. Thank you.
Sorry. So I think, again, this is not just a question of SIDS. In island realities, another speaker mentioned Sweden. I don't mind if I mention Scotland, where I am. One of the big problems here is that island communities feel on the margins of decision making. And again, I don't have any lived experience of the Philippines or Indonesia, but the fact that, for example, in Indonesia, you do have a piece of legislation that focuses on small islands of Indonesia tells me that it resonates in many parts of the world where you do have a mainland and then islands. And it's this idea, again, that decisions are taken far away from you, but then the impacts are felt on your doorstep. The sea level rises on your doorstep. The fresh water is not as fresh as it once was. So how to deal with that from a regulatory, from a policy perspective, there's no one size fits all. A lot depends from context, from a lot of other things. But again, what has been tried out, if you want, here in Scotland is really this concept of island proofing and something called island communities impact assessment, whereby every single piece of legislation or every strategy policy of government or quasi-public body, if it affects or if it is likely to affect island communities in a different way, it has to go through this impact assessment. On paper, this seems amazing. However, there's also a huge risk that it just becomes a tick box exercise. So we're at initial stages here in Scotland with the implementation of island communities impact assessment. We have similar issues, similar policies in other parts of Europe, for example, in Finland, but it's a promising tool to bridge that national, local to even international to some extent decision making. I'll leave it to that.
Sarah, if I may add
Yes.
something.
Martin.
I think there's a fundamental question here. There are traditional approaches to, of course, in all of these places we're talking about, to water supply. It may be rainwater harvesting, it may be dug wells. There is nothing wrong with those in the right place at the right time. Also, pit latrines, if they're sited in the correct way, or septic tanks and constructed in the right way, they can be perfectly good solutions to sanitation. As soon as we get more sophisticated and we have piped systems and we have water treatment and we have sewers and wastewater collection, much like our telecommunication system or our energy system, we need to design, construct, and operate them properly. We can't build them and walk away. So it comes to a question of capacity as well. Capacity to run the systems, the technical assistance backup. Currently in Kiribati, where people, in the middle of the Pacific, where people have traditionally obviously relied on dug wells into the one aquifer there, a desalination plant's being put in place. It is thousands of kilometers from any nearest place that can provide the required technical assistance. We have to think about how these services are going to be delivered in the long term and how they're going to be paid for. If we're committing ourselves to such systems, we need to think about the capacity, we need to think about their links to other parts of the potential technical assistance that can keep them running, the spares and the equipment. We have to walk into this with our eyes open. Otherwise, we will build white elephants that will fail.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Chris now, who's monitoring our online questions. Chris, are there any questions coming in online?
I'm not sure if I'm the Chris you're talking to, but I would love to respond to Martin's.
Okay, so can we adjust the sound, please?
Hi. Greetings again here from Honiara, where the Pacific Wastewater and Water Association are having their annual meeting. I just wanted just a few reflections. I hear you, Martin, and we do have to make sure that we find adequate solutions and the most suitable solutions that when we share it, especially in an island context. At the same time, I do think that we also need to be aware that there may not be any other option for a place like Kiribati. We work very, very close with them. As you know, you've been there. There are no water, and we do need to give them the opportunity to have a decent life, and tackle the water insecurity they're facing. So, which is one of the reasons that has been suggested out there and is being implemented. I just want to give. There's no comments online here where I'm sitting, unfortunately. I will give you another input from here, just a reflection from the conference. The Pacific community has been working very closely together, all of them, through the SPC, the Pacific community, where they've been working on a strategy for water insecurity. And they've just been agreeing on that this week more formally, and hopefully that's going to set the frame to enable them to deal with this and work from community to cabinet, or from community from rich to reef, if you will, and also into the economic to the international setting. So that's very promising. They're very interested in sharing this with you. It's been a long process, but it's there now. And thanks, Sarah, as well, for assisting this process getting to where it is. So the Pacific community, they have a lot of issues, but they're good at coming up with solutions that can tackle them and can bring them into both a more water secure future and more resilient future, as well as opening doors for financing. When they agree on what they want, it's easy to go and ask for it. And so I think they've been doing a really good job in that. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Do we have any other questions in the room? I'd like to also open it up if any of the other panelists would like to intervene with any comments or reflections. Or any of our panelists. Sarah, no? Okay, yeah, Victor?
I just want to say that reflection on the opportunity that the fact that this is a controlled environment, ring fence defined, sometimes even if the islands are small, is even clearer. The idea of what is the sequencing in terms of programming, planning, from a good diagnostics of the vulnerability and water security situation and analytical work to a plan, right? And what is the logical sequence of events in terms of the reforms on the governance side, the enabling environment, the financing, the infrastructure, the operation and maintenance. And if there is an example of an island that has that roadmap really well established and is advancing, or what we see if it's more like ad hoc or addressing parts of the problem differently. I don't know if it's just a question, reflection. Yeah.
I've got a reflection based on your earlier question actually as well. This issue of capacity is really important, obviously for providing services, but also for regulation and for legislation and some of the things that Francisco was making reference to as well. So there are many resorts in these places that on paper in many countries ought to have packaged sewage treatment plants to take their waste and treat it to a certain degree before it's discharged into the environment. If that's not being regulated and checked, then anything can be happening, and we know that is the case. In St. Martin in the Caribbean, there's a new regulation that septic tanks are now sealed boxes, which means they have to be sealed concrete boxes. They have to be emptied on a very regular basis at great cost, or they are illegally discharged. So again, how we regulate and the capacity to regulate and pass legislation that makes sense is an important part of that, of the capacity gap that's there as well. I just wanted to point that important issue out.
Very good, thank you. Yep, Bapan.
Yeah, maybe just reflecting on the second question that you raised. In terms of actually assessment or understanding the problem, I think that was quite well done in many of those islands. I can tell you, like Fiji, if you look at Samoa, you may find actually multiple assessment, not single one. Like there is a 5 assessment, 5 feasibility has been done, but there is no financing actually there. So those are. And then we just need to make sure that how that could become as a coordinated and what is a fit for purpose solution could be brought into the market, starting with the policy, governance, the intervention as well as capacity building. So I think that's the missing part here actually, because finance goes there as an ad hoc basis, and that's why and there is no such kind of sustainability because especially on the island communities, majority of the financing actually go as a grant financing. And once the grant is finished, there is no such kind of OPEX cost. There is no kind of operation and maintenance cost. And if you don't have an operation and maintenance, it's very, very difficult to maintain such kind of asset and asset health.
Yeah. No, this is very good. I'm thinking on the programmatic approaches that we're bringing in the World Bank increasingly. There's MPAs, right? Multi-phase approaches where we want to move from retail sale solutions infrastructure to more scalable solutions with phases in time, long-term engagement. We are doing that at the national level in big countries like Tanzania, Kenya, to really turn around the sector and reach universal access in the long term, etc. But in a small, controlled environment island, the size of the problem compared to those big countries is an order of magnitude or 2 smaller. So we have the opportunity to see changes in those programmatic approaches at scale much faster, I guess, if there is a clear roadmap. And in Djibouti, we are financing, it's not an island, but we are financing rural water supply in a program that will achieve universal access in just one cycle program. Right? So I wonder what opportunities we may have, in some of these islands to really showcase an island that has gone through a 5-10-year program that has turned around the situation. So it's just some food for thought, but anyway.
Victor, I would suggest that in addition to the roadmap for the planning and the implementation, it would be really helpful for us to have roadmaps for the financing. GCF is there now, and it's here, and it's saying it wants to invest in water and sanitation. A colleague who's a marine biologist here at World Water Week, Amelia Wenger of the Wildlife Conservation Society, is reaching out to Blue Finance now. If we can get the advocacy right and tell the stories about why it's important for eco-tourism, there's a whole untapped world of blue funding that we can bring into sanitation and water supply for these islands as well.
And just maybe to add here, actually, the GCF has actually already started a programmatic approach and more systemic. It's called ARPACA in the Pacific with partnership with the Asian Development Bank. And Cook Island government is actually leading as a chair, as well as Palau. So they are trying to come up with all those infrastructure into a more holistic and a systematic way, a phase-wise approach to building the infrastructure. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to need to wrap up, but I see Francesco, you would like to come in just a few seconds,
30
please.
seconds, if I may. Today, something
I cannot hear.
report by the UN commenting on the UN itself, 100 reports a year. That, maybe I'm exaggerating, but the point was that very little people read. What I'm trying to say here is that when it comes especially to policies and laws and legislation, let's also try not to reinvent the wheel. Especially in some regions, a lot of studies have already been done, and then they're put in a drawer, forgot about it, and then they're done again. There's a big challenge that overshadows all of this, which is time, especially for South Pacific SIDS, but most islands, even in other parts of the world. I saw this urgency at The Hague, at the International Court of Justice. The scream is there because there is not time to do perfect research. There is not time to do the best possible project. We just need to start acting. And what our colleague just said about blue tourism, blue economy, whatever color you want, let's just go and find it, but driven by the islanders themselves. Because they in the Cook Islands, they in the Western Isles and Scotland are actually those who know better their reality and with whom we have to work. Just wanted to say that.
Great, thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters and to our panelists. I think this was a great discussion, and thank you, Francesco, for leaving us with that call of urgency and why we need to be acting soon rather than later. At the beginning, we asked for some actionable steps that we wanted to conclude on, and I think for me, listening to this conversation and just this last wrap up, I mean, I think one is a call for an actionable roadmap and also a financing roadmap, but also that we already have a lot of tools available, a lot of research available, and how we adapt that to looking at how we can use our experience across small island developing countries to share that across, but also to adapt the tools that we already have for those different contexts and vulnerabilities. But thank you once again for joining us. Thank you to those online and those in the room. Very much appreciated. Thank you.